Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're starting a new book.
All right.
We're halfway through the year.
Yeah.
So that means one book down, another one to go. We'll see how far we get to this before the end of the year. Who knows? Nuclear apocalypse, zombies, the moon crashing into the sun. Something might happen, and we might have to put a hold. But we did an episode every time, so we're there.
Yeah. So far, so good.
So hopefully you've enjoyed so far. We've done a number of books, and so we're kind of continuing on in our apologetic series. Each one we've done has kind of enhanced or hopefully enhanced our understanding of how to address skeptics, those that claim hard skeptics, those that claim the Bible has issues. And then also people with different worldviews. Those are kind of the main books that we've looked at. And we've also had interviews along the way. All those that can be checked out, cavethecross.com. And so today we're going to start another book, kind of a famous book.
Yeah. This book is like, it had a 10-year anniversary last year. So when it was renewed and updated and that sort of thing. So this was... this is a really good book. This is a book. It's called Tactics, and it was written by Greg Koukl. He's a Christian apologist, radio talk show host. He's an author, obviously, and speaker, and he's founder of Stand to Reason. So that's the name of the organization that he works through, and he has a podcast and that sort of thing. So you can catch him on there, Greg Koukl. Yeah. And
he's really down to earth. Like if what I appreciate about him is sometimes he says, over here we're going to respond to this question, and I need to think about this more. And so he's really honest about where he stands to reason, and also across the spectrum of where you are on presuppositional to classical to evidential. A lot of people respect him. A lot of people recommend this book. I was just watching a YouTube video about 3 books that you must have, and this was one of them. So we're just continuing the tradition of propping up tactics.
Yeah. So we've just finished our Nancy Pearcey's book on her 5 principles, and so now we're moving to this book, and I think these books kind of work together. Actually,
Very well.
We could say that her book gave us a strategy, kind of a broad picture of how to examine worldviews and how to look at them and how to evaluate them and that sort of thing, right? And so it gives us the big picture, where people are coming from, where their ideas lead to, their beliefs, and helps us in that way. This book, Tactics, the subtitle is A Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. So this book gets down to, we might say, the nitty-gritty with regard to, right? Greg Koukl says in this book that he says, no strategy, however brilliant, can win a war, right? The devil, he says, is in the details. Individual soldiers must hit the beach and engage deploying assets, destroying obstacles to gain an advantage, dodging bullets, and all those sorts of things. So this is hitting the beach. This is the actual, feet on the ground, as it were, in terms of talking with people and working through ideas and issues with regard to apologetic methodology.
Right. Yeah. And so you can imagine Greg Koukl standing in front of the American flag with his Patton uniform on, and he's given that famous speech that we know, that Patton gave.
That's right. Yeah, really. I still remember that. I was, anyway. So what is tactics? Well, tactics literally means the art of arranging, right? It's a focus on the immediate situation at hand. Tactics involve the orderly, hands-on, choreographed of the particulars, and so it narrows things down instead of the broad strategy type of thing. So in this book, we're told that the goal of the book, and here he tells us, is, quote, to find clever ways to exploit someone's bad thinking for the purpose of guiding her to truth, yet remaining gracious and charitable at the same time. Right? So that's what he wants to accomplish here. He wants to kind of expose bad thinking, but not be ugly about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
In the first chapter, he has a line that says, if anyone gets angry, I lose.
That's right. Yeah. So either side of the discussion, if you get angry, you lose. If the other person gets angry, you lose. Right? That's the idea. Yeah. So we want to be gracious and charitable in terms of as we're working through and with people.
And,
in terms of
that's exactly what Peter tells us when we are to give our apologetics with love and gentleness. That's what we're called to do. That's what we should be doing. And that's the end goal that is throughout this book.
Yeah. So this book, and you can tell us what this book is all about and how he kind of works through this, right?
Yeah. So kind of the overview of this book is that it's going to show us how to initiate conversations kind of effortlessly. It's how do you work in the gospel presentation when you're at a party kind of deal?
Yeah.
Or you're standing in line,
or somebody makes a comment about Christianity, and now what do you do?
Sure.
What do you say? Right? Yeah.
Or you've got a situation that presents itself where someone's talking about something that, as we saw from our last book, anything could be a conversation that leads us into worldview, into gospel areas. And so this is kind of how to do it. It's not just, that reminds me of a book I read. It's called The Bible. Have you heard of it? This is a really good presentation on the tactics of starting that conversation. It's also to help us to present the truth clearly, cleverly, and persuasively. So being able to not only be a communicator of truth, but also a good communicator of that truth.
Right.
Which, obviously we all fail at. We all need help, and it's always good, especially from a book that's 10 years old. So and
he's suggesting that this book will help us to be able to do that, right? And so that's an amazing thing. If a book can help me to be, clever and persuasive and clear,
there's a first time for everything. So. So we also want to be graciously and effectively expose faulty thinking, both maybe even in our own minds of I can present this a better way, or what are the implications of me saying something where I might slip into modalism thinking, and you're like, wait, hold on, let me reevaluate what the other side would say to that,
right?
Or of course, we're also on the offensive as well. We're wanting to take what people bring to us as their worldview, as their answers to life's ultimate questions, or the ethics of whatever we're talking about, and how to say, well, here's where reductio ad absurdum. This is the absurdity that your argument might lead into, and so how do we pinpoint that location where we can kind of put a thumbscrew to it?
Yeah, and this idea of exposing faulty thinking. After I read this book, I made a note at the very beginning. I said that this book is a lesson in critical thinking. Right, this book teaches us, it's kind of a lesson in informal logic, really.
Yeah.
And so this is a really helpful book in terms of this issue of faulty thinking, bad thinking, and how to reason correctly. Mm-hmm. Right, so this really,
Right, and also to skillfully manage the details of a dialogue, understanding where you're at in the conversation, kind of how to direct it, where you want it to go. If it's not going your way, it's okay to bail out. There's good stories that he has, or that he might put other people in the driver's seat of those conversations as well. Yeah. And so, it's okay to say, I'll get back to you. And it's also okay to say, I have an answer to that question that you think is going to stump me.
Yeah.
And so, how do you present that without, throwing dirt in their face and saying, have you ever thought of that?
Yeah.
And then also to maintain an engaging, disarming style, even under attack, which, it's always going to be hard, especially for something you might be passionate about, especially something that's salvific, that's your faith, that, that
there's an emotional attachment there.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the most important conversation you're going to have, and it could be against somebody who thinks that you believe in a magic sky fairy, who is synonymous with the flying spaghetti monster. and they're just there to scoff at you because you believe in what some goat herders did 2,000 years ago, or whatever the most malicious attack is. And so it's really hard sometimes, especially if you're the one lone person. You have to stand up, and that's even just in a general conversation. Think about what Paul engaged in when he's standing before people that can take off his head or kill him, or just he's on a boat and they want to throw him over the side, or stuff like that. That's what kind of the overview of this book is. And so the overview of our show, and so we're going to do kind of a different take, because this book is kind of so laden with examples, and they're really good examples. Yeah. We'd almost be reading the book. And so what we want to do, and what Tony has done here, is kind of pulled out the main nuggets of detail without the examples. Not that those examples aren't important.
We'll use a few of the examples, especially when we really need to.
Right. Yeah. Yes. We're not going to just avoid it for the sake of not understanding. But we always want this to be a book club. We want you to read it along with us. Mm-hmm. We want you to kind of understand the main points from within it. So we've always viewed the show as a compendium to the books. That's why we always link the books in each episode. And so kind of what we're doing here is maybe it's going to take a couple chapters in an episode, and we're distilling it down. But there's a lot of material that he does cover, and a lot of examples that he does, because these are tactical. These are specifics on how to handle different types of situations. So,
what do I say in this particular situation, right? And how do I communicate that, and that sort of thing? When this person says this, what was the best response to that, and those sorts of things.
So again, not devoiding of examples, not taking away from the book. This is just a different way for us to present it. And who knows? Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. Maybe you want us to do something different. Yeah. There's always comments. There's always Patreon that you can always do. Patreon.com/Cave of the Cross.
So let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of the introduction to this book, he says he's got a promise for us. The promise is this: I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation. Okay, already good. No matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person might be.
Wow.
So, I don't remember what the Council of Chalcedon said about the Trinity and, 1604 or, whenever it might be. You have that friend that does, and he knows all the church councils and what each side argued against. Yes, we should know, we should learn. Obviously, Christians are a reading bunch. That's what this show hopes to encourage, is for you to read and dust off those theology books like this one that you may have had on your shelf or been given as a gift. But there's no doctorate that you need in order to engage with just a conversation with people about your faith. And so, it's always good to know more, because there might be people that say, well, what about all the changes in the Bible? Or didn't Constantine really allow books to be thrown out of the Bible? And we lost some things. Every book by Bart Ehrman, there's always the popular Bart Ehrman, and there's the legitimate Bart Ehrman. Those are two different characters, and so everyone can just throw out, well, Bart Ehrman says, well, okay, what does he say? And so this is more of a on the front lines, and in this first part of the chapter, he kind of makes it synonymous with kind of a battle plan.
Yeah, so, we'll be able to converse with confidence, he tells us, and in any situation.
Right.
So that's I think that's a kind of a huge thing to kind of back up, right? I mean, he's making a promise here of what he's going to attempt to accomplish with us. So I guess we need to hang on and see if he can back up his promise, right?
Yeah. Colossians 4, and I took it a verse back, 3-6 says, "Pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know you ought to answer each person.
Yeah, so that's Colossians 4, right?
Yep. Colossians 4, 3 through 6. And so what Greg Koukl is doing is kind of following Paul's plan here. He has kind of three main points that he pulls out of this one, or that we can derive from Scripture that he also will cover in this book. The first one is be smart, walk in wisdom, as it says in verse 5 there. And also be nice. Paul says to be gracious and be tactical. Know how to answer each person. So it seems like, Paul's not this person that says, well, the Holy Spirit will reach out and move that person in such a way that no matter what you might say, that's good enough. And so it's kind of this esoteric, high-minded view of I'm just there as the body and I'm moving in the water. No, he's saying that we should
walk in wisdom and be smart. Yeah,
we should know things, but we shouldn't just stop and say, well, the Lord can use me at my worst, so that's where I should be. At
the
worst.
Lord can, right, and often does, right?
But
we need to be prepared as well, right?
Right.
We need to be good instruments for the Lord to use, right? Sharp instruments,
right? Yeah, and Christ tells us about this too, that we're going to cover later, of just how to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves, and Jesus is telling us that too. I mean, we should listen. Being nice, our attitude matters. How we present the gospel matters in the way that people respond, and you don't want to. Putting
angry apologists,
your own thorn in people's sides. You don't want to be high-minded. I know this and you don't, and look at you. And atheists can't have morals. You're just all fornicating fools or whatever it might be. And also know how you ought to answer each person. So people are different, and so it might make sense for you to cover the problem of evil with someone, but it might also be someone who's struggling with money and doesn't understand how a loving God could want someone who has given so much time and energy and has a family of 6 to raise by themselves. Why does that matter? And so, knowing your audience is important, and Paul tells us, and God is able to use us at our worst, but we shouldn't just stay there.
Yeah, good. So we want to jump in now to this first chapter that he introduces us to, and he calls it Diplomacy or D-Day. Right? So, so let's kind of get into this and see exactly what he's talking about. Obviously, diplomacy is what folks who represent their government do, right? Ambassadors. D-Day was the time where we were at war and we, kind of went all out in order to win a particular battle.
It was a big one.
Yeah. So he says that apologetics has a questionable reputation, among non-aficionados. So by definition, as we saw, apologists defend the faith, right? They defeat false ideas. They destroy speculations, he says, raised up against the knowledge of God. And he says these things sound like fighting words to many people, right?
Yeah. I mean, going on the offensive, going on the defensive.
Defeat false ideas, right? Destroy speculations, right? That sort of thing. Wow. So defend the faith, right? We're fighting. But he says in Matthew 10:16 that Jesus wants to give us a more excellent way. He says that Jesus said that when you find yourself as a sheep among wolves, we're to be innocent but shrewd, right? Innocent but shrewd. And so that's what he wants us to do, this game plan that he wants to work us through to help us to be innocent, right? But shrewd.
Right. And what Jesus is talking about too is he's saying, I'm going to send you out in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Yeah. So who are we talking to? Yeah. Talking to the wolves.
Yeah.
And so we're supposed to be sheep and doves and wise serpents, So
Servants, wise servants.
Yeah, that's
not serpents.
We want to be tactical. We don't need to bomb the beaches. We need this diplomacy.
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about in this chapter, is that we can throw everything that we got at the enemy, at the person who we're talking to. We can talk about, I know how the transmission of the gospel happened and how we can be confident in it. And here's all the, terminology for it. And here's, we have 5,000 manuscripts and et cetera, et cetera. And the person's just like, I was just having a conversation on what the people on TV were saying. So, okay. We need to be like diplomats, as he says. So not just storming the beaches. We're sitting there, we're talking, we're hashing things out with the person across from us. This is not, we're not waging war against the devil here. We're talking to a person who is made in the image and likeness of God, and so we are
waging war against the devil, but that person isn't the devil.
That's exactly.
In other words, we don't fight in terms of with regard to flesh and blood, but we do fight against principalities.
Yeah, that's a different type of fight.
Yeah.
Right. And so Greg Koukl has kind of termed this the ambassador model. So we're the image of God. We're representing God in this world, and we have that special place, and more so being changed in the likeness and image of Christ. And so how we talk, in the manner we talk, in what we know, that is all reflective of Christ, and we should want to present the best image for God.
Right. So we represent Christ, and we represent God, and the greatest commandment is to love God, and the second is to love our neighbor, right? And so we are to represent a loving God to people, and so that should be part of what we do when we're doing apologetics.
Yep. And so we want to stay in control. We want to know when to talk. We want to know when to present evidence and when to ask questions to clarify or to push the point. Even if your knowledge is limited, having the conversation and being able to go back to it. If you're nice to that person, if you're open about your lack of knowledge, that presents, and he'll cover this in a later chapter of just how much kind of ground that buys you, of saying, I don't know everything. Would you mind me getting back to you? Or there's a book on my shelf that I know will answer this. Give me an hour and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And so this ambassador model kind of buys us that time or that land or the ability to mess up. And if you're just throwing everything out there and you accidentally say the wrong thing, you've missed your target, and the enemy could escape. And so that's not what we want to do. That's not how we want to get in that mindset of not waging war against that person. We're talking to that person.
Yeah. So he says that there are a couple of ways to do this. He says representing Christ in the new millennium requires 3 basic skills. Right. The first one, as ambassadors, we need basic knowledge that's necessary for the task. Well, what is that? Well, we must know the central message of the gospel, of God's kingdom, right? So we need to make sure that we have a way to present the gospel to people. That's that's part of the equipment, the information that we need to have, right? I like to use the Romans road or something like that in order to present Christ to people, right? So we must know the central message of God's kingdom, and we must know something about how to respond to, obstacles and objections that we encounter in our diplomatic mission, right? And so he's going to help us to work through that second thing, particularly in terms of how to respond, right?
Right. And so the next one is to have wisdom, an artful method, and character, an attractive manner. So what we want to present is a message that's clear, that's persuasive, that kind of stays on track, that doesn't bring all these other influences of yes, I might be more comfortable in presenting the moral argument, but let's talk about the teleological argument, or whatever you might be talking about. How best to present that, how to steer it. If you're talking about politics and you're talking about morality, how to steer that towards the gospel and say, here's some points that my worldview tells me that that is important and should be stood by, and so here are the implications from that. What does your worldview say, and kind of compare and contrast, and I mean that puts you in the mindset of Nancy Pearcey, her five methods, and so within those five methods, or whatever you might have, but let's say those five methods, how do you talk within those five methods is important, and so that's what he's talking about here as far as wisdom. This requires the tool of a diplomat, not of the weapon of the warrior, tactical skills rather than brute force. So again, we want to be nice. We're having conversation. Think about it like a Thanksgiving meal. You have that one relative that's just the polar opposite. And so do you want to kind of keep the peace, or do you want to stoke the fire? Sometimes we want the person to go so we can finish the Lions game and only be disappointed on one front. Yeah. Or we want that last piece of pie and Uncle Bill needs to get out of here, and you know how to push his buttons out of here. so that's what we're doing. We're having a conversation at the dinner table, and we don't want anyone to get upset, because if anyone gets upset, you lose.
That's right. Yeah. So these skills then, we have knowledge, we have wisdom, and finally he says we need our character, right? We need our character that can make, and this, he says, our character can make or break our mission, right? Knowledge and wisdom are packaged in a person, right? So they come with the person, so that if the person does not embody the virtues of the kingdom he serves, he will undermine his message and handicap his efforts. And so we need to make sure that we have the proper Christ-like character when we're sharing, right? We need to know at least the gospel and a few responses, right? We need to have this wisdom that comes from the Holy Spirit. And then finally, we need to be the right person. We need to have a Christ-like character when we're sharing.
Yeah. Just think about putting yourself in that other person's perspective, even as a Christian. Who of my elders do I want to go to if I have a question about something? Do I want someone who's attacking me? Why don't you know this? How dare you? I know this. Why, this was something that I learned day one of me being a Christian. Okay, great. So that person's got the knowledge, but they don't have the character. They don't have the definitely the wisdom, the artful method. I would not respond well to that myself, especially if it's something that may be on the difficult end or that I've never heard of before. And so a lot of times, one of the kind of sayings is the fact that today the way that we're responding to each other in such weird and hateful ways is because for so long we've kind of taken the Midwestern approach and not really talked about these things, and then they all boil up into the conversations we're having now, where everything's platitudes. And so again, we're not talking to the mob, we're talking to a person, we're talking to people, and we should view them as such. All right, so we have the three skills, and tactics actually focuses on just one, and that's the wisdom, tactical wisdom. That's the main focus of the book. It offers the techniques of maneuvering in what otherwise might be difficult conversations, and that my loved one is dying. I mean, we've had to face morality of in this year in 2020 of when this is being
and so how can a loving God allow that, right? That's a difficult conversation, right? And so how do you maneuver through those types of things? Well, he's suggesting that that's part of the wisdom that he wants us to have through this book.
It's not enough to say you don't have an answer, because then you're lying in the opposite way. We do have the answer, and we do want to talk about it, even if that person goes away unsatisfied. We're called to be ambassadors for Christ, and so that's what we want to do. The skill of wisdom is to guide you in arranging your own resources in an artful way. Again, you might you might know certain things, but you might not know how to present it well. Like, I might be just getting into Koine Greek, but how do I like present that? How do I pepper that in where it's not just I know Koine Greek, which is definitely something fun to do. But if you're talking about, well, the Bible says this. Oh, well, here's where I can present my knowledge of that and answer their question and hopefully move the conversation forward. It's just approaches that anyone can use to be more persuasive, in part because they help you to be more reasonable and thoughtful instead of just emotional, which, talk about any subject these days, and it's just going to be emotion. And we're going to throw in a few facts just to say, oh, well, you hate the science or you hate people or you want grandma to die or whatever it might be. But we're not saying that emotions aren't important, but we want to be reasonable and thoughtful within those. So we want to be reasonable and thoughtful about our convictions as followers of Christ. So we're presenting kind of your Sunday best to people, and we don't want to be fake about it. So this isn't just a book that you're gonna read and it's a 10-step process with Nancy Pearcey's 5 steps. So you got 15 steps. And this is how to present it. No, this is going to be something that you try, you fail, and great. And so hopefully you have someone else that you might do this with. Tactics have been made into a small group study too. And so there's just so many resources out there. And again, it's one of those things where if you're not confident with it, find someone in your church or your neighbor or whoever, someone in your family, and play the roles and start getting emotional and see how you can, help to be reasonable and thoughtful while someone else is being emotional. And, there's so many different ways to take it. So, if you're wanting to go to the college campuses to preach the gospel, well, find some college kids at your church to practice with and say, what if I said this? What, if I talked about my retirement plan to a 21-year-old, would that matter any difference whatsoever? Maybe not. So,
what about an eternal retirement?
Yeah, there you go.
So this wisdom, but so he's going to give us some skills here, right? That will allow us to do these types of things, right? To work through these difficult questions and to, in an artful way. But they can be used in an ugly way.
Yeah, right.
We can manipulate people, right? Or, we can do what he says, slick ruses on people. Well, that he doesn't, that's not what tactics is all about, right? They are not clever ploys to embarrass other people and force them to submit to our point of view. We're not trying to embarrass people. They're not meant to belittle or humiliate other people that we're talking with, right? Or that we disagree with. So we can, or to gain notches in our spiritual belts, right? So we don't want to be, we're going to learn some very, very powerful techniques, by the way. Very powerful techniques that can be abused by us if we're not careful. And so he wants to warn us that that we shouldn't do that with these particular techniques.
And I will say that there are areas within the atheist camp too that have kind of not taken his specifically as saying like, oh, this is the anti-tactics or the a-tactics or whatever fun thing is. But street epistemology, if you've heard of that, kind of takes that type of approach and kind of makes you think, oh, well, they really do have a good point because here's all their talking points. Here's where they want to direct the conversation. They're not always being truthful in the mindset that they're coming at. And so can we do that too? Can we say, I've got this friend at work and I really just want to preach the gospel to that person. And so I'm going to invite them over for the purposes of, hey, you're living with your girlfriend and I have to get you to stop doing that. That's right. No, we of course we want everyone to live sinless, including each other, but we need to have that understanding of good gospel discipline and also responding in love and being open and honest, because there's no point in not being open and honest about it. We're not secretly keeping tallies. 100% of all salvation belongs to God, and I'm sorry, but he doesn't need you, but he utilizes us, and because we have a relationship with him, and we want to have a relationship with other people in that same way. And then just finally, the goal is this, and it sounds bad, but it's purposely saying this way. The goal is to find clever ways to exploit someone's bad thinking for the purposes of guiding them to truth, yet remaining gracious and charitable at the same time. Right. So we do want to exploit their bad thinking, because that's especially with our last one, with Nancy Pearcey's book, we're looking at ways of which their worldview collapses in on itself, which postulates and makes humanity an idol, and so reduces what humanity actually is, or reason actually is. And so the exploit is kind of video games. If I can take that example of, you find the rhythm, you find the pattern, and it's, on the third fireball, then you jump over and then you can attack. And so that's what it means by exploit. And find clever ways. That's exactly it. You're having a conversation where you're talking about deep things. And so, if someone is talking to you about abortion and brings up how, that there's statistics for rape and incest, that's going to hit emotional chord. And so what's a way that we can combat that and make that not so, such a hard-hitting point, right, or at what it seems to be is a hard-hitting point.
And so this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I said that this was kind of a critical thinking, book. It's a kind of a soft logic book, because it's going to help us. And one of the ways that people change their beliefs is when they realize that what they believe is not true. And so what this book allows us to do is to kind of bring that to the surface, help them to see that, and then in a gracious way help them to move toward the truth is what he's trying to get at here.
Yeah. People often make foolish and fundamental mistakes in thinking when it comes to spiritual things, especially if someone only believes that the only things that are real are physical things. And so, you're kind of having to be of two mindsets here, as far as like, Nancy Pearcey's 5 principles. If you're taking the presuppositional approach and saying, okay, here's the internal critique, here's the external critique, here's the reductionist view. How do I present that to them? And how to present that to the person is the tactics. Right. That's how we do it. Right. The aim is to manage, not manipulate, to control, not coerce, to finesse, not to fight. And so, again, if anyone gets angry, your side, their side, you lose. And so, being manipulative, once it's found out, someone's going to get angry. Either you failed, and so you're beating yourself up about it, or they're not doing exactly what you want, and you're hitting it over the head because you want to take it in this direction. That person finds out and says, "Oh, you were just wanting to talk about this the whole time." Well, peace out, and no one's happy, and no one's going away, no one's thinking about it. Everyone's closed off. That's not what we want. That's not what this book is for. And so it's just a way to that this chapter tempers what will be proceeding in the following chapter.
Right. He says that tactics involves the details of engagement, the art of navigating through conversations, themselves. And so we want to navigate through conversations, expose bad thinking, help people to come to the truth in a gracious and loving manner. And so that's what this book teaches us how to do. That's the aim of this book. And so I think this is, this is going to be really helpful for folks as we work our way through this.
Yeah. This will be the book that we're going to be doing on however long it takes us. We might combine chapters together. We might split chapters up as we usually do. But the links for the book are below. If you click on it, order it. It a little bit helps support the podcast going, and we can get more lights in here, or better equipment, or I can Photoshop better because I'm learning new things. had a lot of fun with doing some artwork with the book that I did with Lauren, the one shot that she made me read on Joyce Meyer's Battlefield of the Mind. I did a lot of photoshopping. That was quite a stress reliever after listening to that book again. And so you can find that out on our Patreon page. But if you just want to sit there and subscribe and listen and follow along in your car, the tactics books, so we're doing the 10th anniversary edition. So some things that might have changed if you have the earlier version. The Audible version's available. Greg Koukl reads that one, and then I'll put links also to Standard Reason as well.
Yeah, good.
So thanks for joining us again. We love doing this. This is a new book for me, so I'm like 3 chapters ahead of you right now. So I've got to maintain my social distancing from you on chapter length. So join us back here next time, and we'll continue to dive into tactics.
That's right. See you next time.